Austin Bell. I'm doing a project today over the limitations of women's rights and citizenship and how they shape the nation despite these limitations. This is for early United States history 2010. And before I get started, I want to excuse any misslips, any loud noises, barking. This is my first podcast, so this is going to take a lot of breath out of me, so I'm going to have to take a lot of breaks. So hopefully there's not a lot of smacking, there's not a lot of, annoyances during this podcast, and I hope maybe it's kind of worth a listen and I kind of get my point across. But I wanted to break this podcast down in sections. I was going to start off with the limitations. That might not be the longest, but limitations, breaking it down from how we go from limitations to basically shaping the nation, or like the early beginnings, and how women basically set a pathway to shaping the nation and also getting American ideas back in the day, very hateful and very bigoted ideas out the way, and really pave a future for future generations. And I feel like this project would really help out a lot with not setting this up, but basically helping me get a better idea of kind of the positioning of women and giving me a more open mindset with things. But to get started, let's talk about the limitations. So basically, women were set in a role, and that role was to be childbearers and kind of the staple for the home. And when I say the staple, I mean basically cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, and being at home. There was no other roles for women. They didn't have jobs. They couldn't work. They didn't have rights. They didn't have rights to vote, have the rights to basically have the children that they have, if that makes sense. They didn't have rights over their own children, is what I'm trying to say. They could have children and the husband will still own the children, which makes no sense because why? But getting past that point, they didn't have the right to own property, make contracts, or have jobs or anything like that. And hopefully I'm not missing anything else. Basically, they had no control of their money either. They were to sit in the shadow of men, and they were seen as very inferior, even intellectually inferior. And I'm sure at some point, me empathizing, if I was in a woman's point of view or in her shoes, I would not want to be there for long. I want to be my own person. I want to have my own identity. And I felt like that's what a lot of women back then probably didn't have. They were just, you are your family. And that's it. And so women try to get past this role of being like behind a man to do everything. And they felt as if they had their own rights, especially when we start getting into around the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, we have the statement that all men are created equal. And one of the earliest women who really played a role, also Abigail Adams, she wrote to her husband basically to remember the ladies. And she wanted more rights from, the new American government, as she felt that as women would be stuck in the same position. So even early on in the American history, women were definitely fighting. They might have not had a huge impact at first, but it was building, and it was there, and it was definitely going to get past a certain point. But women, like I said, they couldn't vote. They just were there like second class citizens. So as we kind of get further, we get into the age of reform, and I'm probably going to pause right here and kind of collect a little bit of my notes. But the age of reform was basically, obviously in the name, just a reform of American society, and we get groups that work together to kind of just change the old bigoted ways that like Americans had at the time, or mostly white men at the time. So we get past that, and women started getting more access to education and really get footing in setting up a future for more women. But I'm going to pause. Okay, so just to recap, we got done. Well, I got done talking about how the limitations were set for women, and now we're getting to the point where they're breaking away from this. And so we started getting to a point where women started getting more educated, and this was kind of wasn't accessed before, but now is because of the need to educate their children. So of course they need to be educated themselves before they educate their children. So this really set a not a huge not a huge point, but like definitely an important effect later on for women. And so women started to become more educated and became just as educated as men, even being seen just as equally educated or intellectual equals as men. So we had this point in time, and we had educators such as like Emma Wheeler, Catherine Beecher, and Mary Lennon, who started very like prestige independent women's schools that taught basically the same curriculum as a man or boys schools. And so this really kind of set grounds for women spreading education across the country, and made this kind of like an everyday thing for women now. Women now have the potential to learn just as much as a man and get ideas out there. Also, this helped them more or less come together and really form groups and movements that later out would play important roles in shaping the nation. So, like during the abolish movement, women you would really engage in this, and this became part of the education. Women were setting out to be advocates, fighting against injustice of slavery and stuff, and like they would really go out their way to be voices, even though they weren't really fully heard by men. They still not sat down, but they stood up against the basically the injustice of slavery, and they really helped kind of set a movement, and they helped get maybe reach out and get this group and that group to come together and really fight against slavery. So we get that kind of intersects, and women really help spread that, I guess, that sense of oh, we can really fight, this sense of confidence into each other. And we have women like Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and these women really were like a really advocates for helping against slavery and injustice. So as this movement kind of began, and women still didn't really have the right to vote or really have much say, they stuck out in ways like setting petitions and expressed their anti-slavery beliefs to the government and the people around them. And we had more people that were empowered that obviously had effect to really help women kind of get together and voices, have their voices heard. So as we get to a lot of the anti-slavery movements and stuff and women rights movements, we had kind of like a convention, and this convention really brought women together. This convention was called the Seneca Falls Convention, and this was a place for women rights activists to come together and discuss problems women were facing, and really stick together informed ways to be heard. And this is also kind of the conventions to help out seeking the right to vote, obviously, and really time. All of these women are coming together to really break away from an idea, or maybe in one terms like the cult of true womanhood, and that is just for them to be submissive wives and mothers. This goes back to the limitations. They really weren't, they were to be dependent on men. And as you see, they really don't need men. They still kind of do at the point in time to be heard and have kind of, a way to get around and do certain things, to have property. But these women were really, really getting up there and really becoming very predominant people in society. Even if men didn't accept it or really acknowledge it, they were getting to that point. And I want to kind of get back with some women that had that ability, not ability, but that had that power and that charisma to help motivate more people. So I'm going to get to my second part in just a second. Okay, to continue where I last left off, I was talking about the women that helped kind of with the movement and kind of get a stepping stone. I want to talk about one of the main ones. The first main two really was Susan B. Anthony. She was very important for the women's suffrage movement. She was a lifelong advocate for civil rights and voting rights. She had a Quaker's faith or background, which kind of exposed her to want to fight for a cause and really stick up for people of different race and gender equality. She was responsible for putting the movement on the map of lectures and conventions, which the Seneca Fall Convention is one, for example, at the beginning of the Civil War. And then we have another important one, not as, how can I say, not as devoted for racial equality, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was also one of the founders and for women's rights in the United States, or suffrage movement. And she planned the Seneca Fall Conventions. And all of this build up during this time really, or this grouping, really kind of set a foundation for women and groups around, like reform groups around the United States. And these two women were very, not the only, but very main two, I want to say, that helped out a lot during these conventions. They would go across the world. Sorry about the plane noise. They would go across the world and like to London and join anti-slavery conventions, and would join events that would frustrate like male attendees, that would ban women from events. They would join events they weren't really allowed to be in, and it was a lot of organizing and basically planning to just set themselves to be such great leaders for this. And also having, going back to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was also another person that was an author of the Declaration of Sentiments, which were pretty much just documents for the women's movement. They include like reforms and voting rights for women, and this all was just kind of, like I said, it was just going all into one line. It was extremely hard. It wasn't easy for women to kind of get anywhere really because of this. Like, they were really going out their way. They were doing a lot and they were planning a lot, but it really wasn't doing much impact until we get to the temperance movement. And this is when the women's Christian temperance movement really kind of played a really big role in helping women kind of get in a place or getting the right to vote. And the temperance movement was really just a way to kind of get laws against drinking or prohibition. And the women's Christian temperance movement really gathered a lot of members. It gathered around like 150,000 members. And this became like the largest female organization. And so this organization that was formed by Francis Willard brought like a board of reform just really to push the agenda to, because once they kind of got, you know, basically people to not really to stop drinking, but try to vote against drinking, it was kind of like backed with, well, we should also kind of have the right to vote. And that was even pushing the agenda to vote even more. And they just kept forming more and more and more. And this wasn't really the only thing that women did, but the temperance movement was very important in the sense of gathering such a big, large following to help with the reform and also play an impact. It really hit where a lot of men wouldn't want to deal with. They, you know, they wanted to drink. No one's going to stop. They're not going to stop themselves from drinking. So obviously, women came in and set in a position that kind of really got them to be acknowledged and get the ball rolling even more. And kind of moving on from that, we also kind of get more ways that women really kind of set an impact and set a very larger role to kind of help shape future, not future, but like more along the lines of years later, which would kind of get them to the point where they can get the vote to right or the 19th Amendment. People had a lot of place or time to do anything, and I feel like this was a really good point in time that they really broke away from this limitations, because their limitations were really just alone. They had no control. They couldn't divorce. They couldn't vote. They had no right to property, and they had no right to really sign up for contracts or jobs. They didn't have. Excuse my language. They didn't have like the right to own their own children, which makes no sense. Like, they had no power, and this really took a massive leap to get away from that. And it really shaped the nation as a whole, because without this, I feel like that without this consistent fight or this consistent way to have an identity or have a voice and to get away from the shadow of men, I feel like they might have been stuck there longer. And thinking about this is not too long ago. This is like almost 100 years ago. Like, that's really not that long ago. So I felt as women during this time, getting from the 1800s to the 1920s, they really took a lot of steps and reached a big goal that I feel like has shaped the nation. It has changed a lot of how we see things, and they pushed a lot of agendas that a lot of men at the time would refuse to listen to. So overall, defeating those limitations and getting away from them, I feel like they really helped shape the nation as a whole. And yeah, that's really all I have to say for my podcast. I'm going to try to go back and edit as much as I can, try to listen over it and edit most of the stuff. So